This program is brought to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
This presentation is delivered by the Stanford Center for Professional Development, providing graduate-level education to working professionals, online, on campus, and on-site. For more information, please visit study.stanford.edu.
Good afternoon and welcome to the seminar on people, computers, and design. Today we're going to talk about global optimization. This is a really important topic in internet security. I've got handouts for people, or maybe that's for the other class. So today we're really fortunate to have Katherine Isbister from Rensselaer Polytech, and this is old stomping grounds for Katherine. She used to be here. She actually took this class as a student. She worked with Cliff Nass in the communications department. And so we're lucky to have her back. In the last year, Katherine has gotten tenure, a book, and a new child. And so that's a really remarkable year. I'm in awe. Next week, we're going to have Manish Agrawala, who's also a former Stanford alum. Manish worked with Pat Hanrahan. And he'll be our speaker next Friday. And with that, I'll turn it over to Katherine.
Sounds great. Yeah, it's really wild to be on the other side, and I'm just like looking out at all these faces here. It could happen to you, so be careful what you wish for. Okay, so after I left Stanford, I took a somewhat circuitous route to RPI. I was actually a postdoc in Japan at NTT, and then I worked at a startup for a while doing interactive characters. And I actually taught a course in Terry's HCI series that, in fact, one of the students here took that course with me when I was here, so that's also kind of funny. But then I decided I wanted to do the tenure track thing, full-time thing, and I had landed at RPI. And what I do there is I direct and I founded a games research lab, and I'll show you a snapshot of my lab in a minute. I'm also the program chair of RPI's master's degree in HCI. And my research focus is on social and emotional aspects of interaction design and studying that and coming up with design principles to address those issues. So here's a picture of my lab. So when I started using my startup budget at RPI, I got this really sort of snippy email from the dean's office because I had bought a sectional sofa and I had gone to IKEA and bought a bunch of furniture, and I was buying all these video games, and they were kind of like, is she just sort of, building out her living room? What is going on? And I had to say, no, actually, I'm trying to create a really friendly research environment for studying what people do when they play games, and I promise you this is a legitimate research topic. But yes, I did try to make a really comfortable environment for playing games so that people come into the lab and they don't see me wearing a white coat and feel really tense about what they're about to do, but instead I always provide pizza and I show them exactly where all the cameras are in the room. And in fact, I had one group come to me in the middle of a session. They needed more soda, so they made a sign that said more soda and like held it up to the camera. So the aesthetic of the way I do my research is just really, really different than your average experimentalist. And I study social gaming. I just wanted to put my research values out there to share with you. First of all, I really believe that interfaces should be fun. They should be enjoyable to use, and that the experience of using them should be just as engaging as the outcome. Also, I'm really interested in extending the capabilities for interfaces to allow us as human beings to be expressive in our own ways, using gesture. I know people here are working on gesture, body, eye tracking, all of those sorts of things, making it more intuitive and natural for people, not making us have to reach so far forward to the machine. And I actually, and this is the biggest sacrilege of all, and it's even worse on the East Coast than on the West Coast, when I say that I actually think research should be fun. Like, I think it should be fun and engaging and enjoyable to do research, and there's nothing wrong with having fun and setting up a study, and that's actually a good thing. And I believe that it should be supportive and humane, that the people who participate in your research actually have fun with it too. So those are my research values. And I have various approaches to looking at games. One thing I've done a lot of, and that's mostly what I'm going to talk about today, is case studies of what's going on, design patterns, if you will, looking at what's happening in some of the best examples of video games and how to learn from what's being done to do better design in other kinds of areas of HCI. And in particular, because of my training, I worked with Cliff Nass, as was mentioned. He's very interested in how people relate to technology socially. So I was trained in learning about principles of social psychology, and what I did in my own work in Cliff's group was I specialized in body language of characters and the way people read the bodies of characters. So a lot of what I've been looking at that's in this book that I'm mostly talking about today is things that you could find in the social psychological literature. Also, as I mentioned, I've been doing a lot of game parties in my lab, and I use the video from those game parties. I invite cohorts of people who play games together already, who have a rapport with one another, into the lab, and then I look at what's happening with them and try to understand, again, try to extract design principles from what the games are doing to evoke the reactions that they do in the players. So this is a screenshot of some people playing DDR. And we actually have a really intense DDR club at RPI, some very, very competitive and interesting players. So I had them come in and sort of run their own sessions, and that was a lot of fun. Sorry, yeah, Dance Dance Revolution. That's what DDR stands for. It's a dancing game, and you have these pressure-sensitive pads, and typically you put 2 of them side by side, and people compete and play in rounds of 3 songs. But sometimes people will do things like dance across 2 pads. There are all kinds of strange side games that people play. Okay, and so the third way that I tackle the subject of games is I've wandered into the area of innovating new ways to evaluate what's happening. Because one of the things I realized really quickly is the kinds of metrics you need to use to study games are really different than the kinds of metrics you need to use to study productivity applications. And you need to know if someone's having fun. You kind of need to know if someone's having fun right now, as opposed to on a survey at the end of the game. So I've been playing around in the space of different ways to generate emotional feedback from people. So that's just some of the range of what happens in my lab and in my research group. But today, we're going to focus on game characters. And the reason that I got into studying game characters, I don't know if some of you may never have even seen this guy. How many people have seen this guy? Okay, so still quite a few people. This was like what do you call it? This was so depressing to me when people started hating him, because my research topic in grad school was interface agents, and I was really excited about it. And everyone was saying, oh, like that stupid paperclip. That was the first word out of everyone's mouth, and I was so depressed about that, you know, even when I was a postdoc, you know, and I would design these really interesting characters, do these really interesting applications, and still the first thing people would say to me is, oh, is that like the paperclip? I hate those things. So before I completely abandoned the area of interface agents, I suddenly had this thought. I think I was watching a friend play a video game. I was like, wait a minute. People love characters in games. Why is that? There's got to be a reason for that. And maybe there's something there. Maybe I don't have to totally give up this research area, but maybe there's something we're doing wrong in the productivity space that I could learn from. So I have as a contrasting image here, how many people have seen Locoroco? Oh, wow, nobody. Okay, you should at least go to something like GameSpot and look at the videos. I don't have a video in this, but it's these little friendly, happy blobs, and it's on the PSP, and it's just a little platforming game, and they giggle, and they bounce, and they roll around, and they break apart into lots of little guys, and it's just the funnest thing you ever saw, and it makes you laugh. So things like that, I thought, these things are done so well. I want to unpack why these things work so well in contrast to something like this. So what is it the game characters do well? Well, to save you, 4 years of hard labor and, studying actually one of my research assistants in the room, she got so much footage from so many games and lots of students in the classes here and at RPI. Well, here's what they do well. I mean, if you have to leave now, this is essentially the talk. They actually have social skills, okay? Like, they're not as nerdy as the characters that have been designed for productivity applications. And I'll break out the various ways in which they have social skills. But that, in a nutshell, is what I learned, that the people who are designing these characters for games were putting a lot of really interesting social smarts into what they were doing with their design. So what we did is we looked at games that had won awards for their character design, or that were incredibly popular, or that had word of mouth in terms of great design. And I started to see patterns that matched some really well-known social psychological findings. So these are the various skills that I'm going to go over in the talk today, one by one. And then I will also spend some time talking about why I think this is very relevant to you as practitioners in other areas of HCI. So the first thing that I noticed is that game characters make a really, really great first impression. And they take advantage of how your brain works from the moment that you see them. And that's not the case for a lot of traditional interface agents. Not necessarily a lot of attention is given to that first moment of engagement. So they use things like attractiveness, okay? I mean, similarly to movies and Hollywood, game designers pull out all the stops in designing their characters. And you will never see a sort of awkward-looking or weird-looking character unless they really, really want you to think, whoa, that guy is strange-looking. So I have these two characters. This is a character from the Final Fantasy XII game. I mean, beautiful costuming, really attractive face, you know, lots of sort of soft focus detail like an old Hollywood movie. I mean, all the stops are pulled out to make you feel, oh, you know, that's so nice. This guy is from Twisted Metal Black, okay? He's this psychotic clown that has escaped from a mental asylum. It's really clear from looking at him that is who he is. And he is not attractive. And actually in games like that, that's part of the charm for people, is to play this nasty, down and ugly kind of guy. But the point is, you can look at these characters and you can guess so much about them just from looking at them, just in that 1 second. And that's all stuff that your brain is hardwired to pick up on, but it's not necessarily taken advantage of that often in traditional interface agents. Okay, another thing that games do really well is work with what some people call your reptile brain, which is this whole fight or flight response. You know, you have to decide right away when you engage with someone, are they a threat or are they a friend? You know, kind of before you even start figuring out, okay, who are they? Who do they know that I know? There's a part of your brain that's always running this loop of, okay, friend or foe. So game designers are really good at telling you through what their characters do, this is something to approach or this is something to avoid. So I picked these two examples. I actually have video here. I get my mouse to come up. This is Nintendogs. How many people have seen Nintendogs? Okay, this is on the DS. It's actually a little touchscreen game. You can pet this dog. You pet his little head, and you throw the ball for him. You can give him a name and call him, okay? This is all very, you know, he's a puppy. It starts out as a puppy. I mean, what is more approachable than a puppy? You know what I mean? So everything about cuteness and, you know, comes right up to the screen and sort of, you know, moves around for you. You know, all those signals, they're heavy-handed signals that make you feel like, I really want to approach this character. And that pulls you right into the game, okay? Where's my... So contrast that with this guy, Final Fantasy XII. It's a little dark. It's much brighter on my screen. I hope this is not going to be... Okay, so it's better over there. You might want to look over there. I guess the projector here is a little bumpy. But the music, the giantness of this character, the way he roars, the big sharp teeth, right? Everything about this character tells you he's a threat. He's scary. You're going to have to fight this big bad boss monster. And the scale of you to this character, right? So again, pulling out all the stops to tell you right away in how it's framed, in how the character looks, and how it behaves. This is something that you really want to avoid, but you can avoid it if you're going to get to the next level. It really ups your emotional involvement in what's going on. Another interesting trick that I saw a lot in popular video game characters was baby faces. How many people know about the baby face effect? Okay, a few people. This is a good thing to know about because it could have a lot to do with how well you do and whether you're trusted or not, and so forth. If you look at TV announcers like weathermen and so forth, a lot of times they have these wide set eyes and this big cheery round face. They actually have these baby face features, like a baby, okay? And there's research that shows that if you have a face that looks like that, people tend to trust you more, and they tend to feel more warm toward you than if you have a mature face. Like for men, it's like a prominent brow and more of a bigger nose and so forth. But they might also think that you're not as responsible for your actions. So this is very bizarre. So what's funny to me is, obviously games started out doing this because of the pixel problem, because characters were really tiny and they had to have these big eyes in order to be seen. But I think that the phenomenon has endured partly because having an avatar with a baby face makes you really want to take care of it and be engaged with it, and it seems just very likable and trustworthy. You see a lot of that, particularly in Japanese games or in games oriented towards children. So that was something interesting to note. And in general, game designers are very astute at using human social equipment to achieve maximum effect. So this game is Zelda Wind Waker. Some people didn't like the art style. They thought it was too cartoony and simple. But watch this video and see how much emotion you can read from the faces in this cutscene. It's pretty incredible. So the sort of happiness at seeing his sister, and the surprise, and the shock, and the kind of depression at the end, like, oh my God, what am I going to do? My kid's sister has been stolen by this giant bird. And you pick that all up from these characters that are really simple, but they're very artfully designed to maximize that kind of emotional expression. Another place that games have paid a lot of attention, that I think that other areas have been very, very slow to pick up on, but I think that the ball has started rolling, is in how expressive human bodies are. And how much they convey about personality and emotion and so forth. And this is a clip from The Shadow of the Colossus. How many people have played this game? Okay, a couple of people. So this is a PlayStation game. It was a sequel to Ico, which was a very well-known Japanese game. This game, the entire gameplay mechanic is you encounter these colossi, these giant statues, and you fight them by climbing up on them. So you're like this little tiny guy, this very vulnerable guy. And if you watch the movement of the Colossus and the movement of the character, it's really pretty amazing. Just how sort of weighty and ponderous that character feels is a big achievement for games, actually, because a lot of times there's criticism of football players and such, that they run as if they only weighed 10 pounds and so forth, but this game is really, really good at it. The horse has dynamic motion. It adapts to you as the player, and it can navigate up and down terrain in a really realistic way. And the swinging and swaying of that character was very carefully crafted. It was a mix of procedural animation and hand-drawn animation. I saw talk about it last year. You can't hear me. Oh no, sorry. Okay, so you sort of get the idea there. But what I was trying to say that somebody was saying they couldn't hear is that was a very crafted mix of procedural animation and hand-drawn animation. And I saw a talk last year at the Game Developers Conference devoted to how that team, the whole design team was there talking about how they got that motion to look as good as they did, because that's how important it is to game designers. And it really has a big impact on how you feel when you play. Also, game designers make really masterful use of voice in games. And I'm kind of going back in the Wayback Machine here to show you this example because the graphics are so bad, but the effects are still so good because of the voice acting. So how many people ever played Grim Fandango? This is an old LucasArts game. Okay, so a couple people. So, so in the first scene here, this is a puzzle-based game where you're trying to get this VIP pass to get into this part of the game, and there's this sort of snooty elevator operator. So you're going to hear the before and after dialogue between your character and the elevator operator before the pass and after the pass.
Oh, sorry, monsieur, but this is the elevator to the High Rollers Lounge.
That's where I'm going.
It is members only.
You must be new.
And you must have a VIP pass to come upstairs. Adieu.
Okay, so that was kind of harsh. Now after you get the pass.
I'm sorry, monsieur, but...
Here's my pass, Jean-Claude. Now shut those doors and drive.
Oui, monsieur. But actually, my name is Raoul.
So all this information about status and this very satisfying moment for you as a player of this game, like, here's my pass, you jerk, you know? And it's all happening in audio cues. I mean, this is how it looks in the game. It's tiny, tiny pixelated. You can't even see the guy who's running the elevator. It's all happening through the voice. Okay, so that's kind of the first impression stuff. All of the different cues that are being orchestrated and the kinds of social psychological tricks, if you will, that people know about that are being exploited. Also, once you get into interacting with game characters, the way I put it is they know their place. And what that means is they have a fairly clear social role and relationship to you as the player. Unlike Clippy, the paperclip, who's sort of maybe kind of trying to do everything for you and maybe also kind of doing nothing, game characters have a very delimited role in engaging with you in the game. And that role is grounded in your own goals and motivations. And what that helps to do is it sets up clear expectations for the player. Okay, I'm going to orient to this character in this particular way, and then if that doesn't happen, I'm going to be upset. I have an emotional contract with this character, right? It also helps the designers focus their design, and that'll come across in the various examples of game social roles that I'm going to show you here. So the first social role that I want to mention is minions, because this is a very interesting one that I haven't seen used in other spaces, but could potentially be very intriguing as a social role for characters in other applications. In games, you often have these minions. They're these little tiny creatures that run around and do stuff for you, things that you couldn't do on your own. And you're sort of this godlike figure in relationship to them. They're completely loyal to you. They do everything you ask them to do. And it's really fun to watch them run around in the aggregate. You don't try to get to know them as individuals. They might all look really similar. So the designers focus a lot of attention on their movement as a group and how they respond to being delegated to, and also sometimes play around with those expectations. So the first example is from this game Pikmin. You're a tiny spaceman and you land on this planet and you start growing these little plants, and the plants are your minions. And you can throw them around and they can carry things for you, and they carry them back to their spaceship, and then they generate more little minions. So you have this huge farm of minions that you're gathering. And they can do things like this. They can unlock a level by pushing something out of the way. So another very famous group of minions is from the game Warcraft 3. There were these peons, and what I'm going to play for you is what happens if you click over and over and over again on one of these peons, because this is a place where the game designers kind of turn to the fourth wall and say, ha ha, I know what you're doing to this character, and I'm not going to let you kind of get away with it without making fun of it.
Master, what do you want? Why are you poking me again? Why don't you lead an army instead of touching me? Poke, poke, poke. Is that all you do? Ooh, that was kind of nice. Me so horned, me hurt you long time. Me no sound like Yoda, do I? It not easy being green.
So that's kind of the escalating sequence of things that happens if you keep poking them. When the game designer knows that you really shouldn't be poking them for game reasons, they kind of acknowledge and nod to that. Okay, so contrast that with, I won't show this because I just showed you this clip, something like a boss monster. And boss monsters in games are usually huge. You can't beat them right away. You have to die a few times to actually, and so coming around the corner and seeing the boss monster is a lot of the fun. Unlike minions, they're not around in the game for very long. So from a developer's point of view, there are very specific things they have to do. They have to scare you right away. They have to make it hard in certain predictable ways. And they have to really create this big spectacle. The boss has to be really spooky and scary and kind of have that big impact. But it's not trailing around with you like a minion is through the whole game. So by delineating these social roles, you save yourself a lot of time as a developer as well. You focus the emotional energy of the player. The player knows what to expect from a boss, so you play around with that space and you deliver what they're expecting, maybe a few twists on what they're expecting. It's a way to focus your energy. Another role that you see sometimes in games that I think is kind of a curious role is the sidekick. And sidekick characters, unlike minions or boss monsters, often don't do anything that's that useful in terms of gameplay, like they don't pitch in and help you with a battle. But what they do is offer you advice and kind of moral support. And in this case, and sometimes they actually poke fun at you and remind you to laugh at yourself as you're playing a game. So this is from the original Jak and Daxter game. Let them adjust the level. There's a little guy that rides on your shoulder named Daxter. He actually won an award for character design. So this guy's about to die, and you'll see what Daxter does.
Better you than me.
So he's this little sarcastic guy. It's like a big voice and a little body kind of guy. But he's sort of lightening up what's going on for you. It's frustrating to die in the game. So sidekicks have an interesting emotional support role in games. They're not really practical support. They're more emotional support. And that's, again, something that as a designer, you probably think a lot about the dialogue that character has and those moments, those particular moments where they can be funny or helpful. The last social role that I wanted to touch on is archenemies. They're kind of like boss monsters in the sense that they're supposed to be big and spooky and scary. They're sort of something that was pulled in from movies, if you will, like James Bond and so forth, where you don't really get to actually fight the archenemy. Maybe you do at the very end, but probably not. He's sort of masterminding, you know, a bunch of big thugs that you have to fight. But what the archenemy is supposed to do is really rile you up. So in contrast to the other characters I showed you, this type of character usually only exists in cutscenes, not actually even in the gameplay, which again allows developers to focus their design efforts. They don't even have to talk to the people unless they're doing real-time cutscenes in the game engine who are making the game engine. They can just make this character with a team that does pure straight animation. It allows them to focus their efforts.
Hey, Katherine.
Yeah.
When you play those clips, can you turn down the audio just a touch?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to let them adjust levels, but I'll turn them down.
That's perfect.
How's that? Okay. So with that clip, for some reason, it reminds me of Dr. Strangelove. I don't know why, but I mean, he's shot from below, and he's like has this maniacal laugh, you know. And you're supposed to save Mimi from having to marry this nasty guy who just stole all the bananas from the village. It's all the tricks that you could possibly have to rile you up to then go and fight in the game. And with this idea that eventually, somewhere in the game, you know you're going to be able to actually knock down this character who's been annoying you and everyone you love. And that'll be this grand satisfaction. So that's just some of the social roles. I have more of them in the book. But the gist of it is, it's a way to create an emotional contract with the player, to focus your development efforts and to not try to be everything to everyone. Also, another advantage I realized that game characters have is that they know a lot more about who you are than your average interface agent, in the sense that game designers are typically targeting known demographics. People who like to play a certain genre of game, who expect certain things from that kind of game, and the characters that they design are crafted to appeal to those people's idea of fun, not trying to address everyone in the world and how they might interact. Also, game designers, because they have really rapid cycles of product development, if a game picks up an audience they weren't expecting, they can take advantage of that and start creating packs and editions and so forth, and iterations of that game to take advantage of that audience, which means that the characters in these games typically are much more targeted to you and what you think is fun than a character would be in a sort of global interface type situation. So the examples I have here, the one on the left is Animal Crossing. How many people have played any version of that game? Okay, a few people. This game, you actually shop and collect things. So you get the idea. So this was really popular, much more popular with a wider swath of female players than games that involved killing and lots of blood and guts. And that wasn't an accident. The people who designed that game gave some thought to, well, we'd like to have a broader audience, and this is a nonviolent way to play and interact. So they had a feeling that that's who they were going for, and they managed to get more of that market. And contrast that to something like EA's sports franchise, right? And actually, this is more and more common as games become more risky to develop, that game developers have really developed this trick where they say, okay, we know there's this huge market of people who like sports. If we design a game that's about sports, and this particular style is very, just like watching TV, okay? So watch how this unfolds at the beginning of this.
And the Sacramento King. Hi, I'm Marv Albert, along with the Czar, Mike Fratello. Looks like we're ready to introduce the starting line.
I think you can see it better on the screen because of the... Turn the brights or the...
They can turn the lights down and touch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, why don't you lower the lights a little bit, if you could. Cool. It's like the holodeck or something. But so they have the player lineup just like you see on TV before you actually start playing the game, and the announcer and everything. So EA is banking on the idea that if you're used to watching basketball on TV, then it's just going to slide you right into playing. Not only that, but actually I was playing FIFA soccer over Christmas one time. Yes, we have a fan in the room. And my stepfather was like, wow, I can't tell the difference between watching a soccer game on TV and watching you play this game. So they create this interesting secondary audience of people who like to spectate sports, who can now spectate game playing of sports, which is a boon for game players who have loved ones who aren't that interested in watching them play games. The Sims is a really interesting story. That game was originally not designed for the audience that turned out to be the biggest set of fans. And I heard Will Wright tell a story that what happened with The Sims is guys, like kind of computer programming, usual gamer type guys, would go in to Best Buy or whatever, buy this game, go home, play it for like a week, and be like, this is really stupid. Like, I don't get it. Meanwhile, their daughter or their girlfriend or their wife would be like, what is that? That's really cool. And start playing with it and sort of building the house and creating fights and relationships. And so the makers of The Sims were like, oh, okay, that's our demographic. And just went for it and continued to go for it. So that's just to point out that game makers are nimble because they rely on people freely choosing their software, that when they see a demographic that is interested in their game that they didn't expect, well, they'll just go for it, you know? Or if they don't hit the demographic they thought they were going to, they will tune it in the next round. They're not trying to hit anyone and everyone. They really are trying to focus in. Another very interesting thing about games is they also tell you as the player who you are. And I've been calling this player identity affordances, okay? So they start to provide you a bridge into your identity into the game. So you don't get to come in as just who you are, as your street self, you know, your Clark Kent self. You're told what kind of a Superman you are by the game. And that unfolds both in how non-player characters act toward you. They cue you about who you are and what you're like. But also, since most games have a player character, you watch your avatar in cutscenes, and if it's a third-person view game, you see yourself acting, and that cues you about, oh, okay, this is the kind of person I am, this is what I'm like. So I have a funny example from Grim Fandango in which you're introduced to the main player character, and he goes from being somebody that is one way to somebody that's another way. So let me play that. And it also has a little bit of NPC stuff in it.
Nervous? No. Just your appearance. It's a little intimidating. Intimidating? Me? But I'm your friend. My name's Manny Calavera. I'm your new travel agent. I don't want a new travel agent. I want to go home. You can't go home, Celso. You're dead. But you're not alone. Everybody here is just as dead as you. That's why we call it the land of the dead. Are you ready for your big journey? No. What journey? The 4-year journey of the soul. It is quite a big trip. And I can't lie to you, Celso. It could be very, very dangerous. Unless you were to take that money you were buried with and buy a better travel package from us. I mean, wouldn't you rather cross the land of the dead in your own sports car? Maybe try a luxury ocean cruise? Or, if you led a very good life, you may even be eligible for a ticket on the number 9 itself. The number 9? That's our top-of-the-line express train. It shoots straight to the 9th underworld, the land of eternal rest, in 4 minutes instead of 4 years. But very few people qualify. Let's take a look at your records. Well, the bad news is the train appears to be just out of your reach, but I still got a couple of tricks up my sleeve here. Yaha! Yes, that's the ticket. The Excelsior line. Yes, she's a beauty. That compass in the handle will sure come in handy, too. Oh, you're going to have a great trip. Wish I was going. Why don't you? You could give me a lift. Oh, I can't leave here until I've worked off a little debt to the powers that be. Community service, eh? Well, I guess there are some folks worse off than me. Oh, I'll be leaving here soon enough. No thanks to dead and no commission low-life cases like yours, Menso.
Hey, Manny, the boss told me to tell you not to leave early tonight. He wants to talk to you about something when he gets back from his trip.
Tell Don not to worry. I'm not going anywhere. Especially not with clients like that. Where do they get these guys? They don't qualify for anything good, so I can't sell anything good. Can't work off my time, and I'm stuck. Stuck selling walking sticks to a bunch of burros for eternity. I need better clients. I need a real saint. I need a lead on a rich, dead saint.
Okay, so...
¿Qué es esto?
So he went from being the Grim Reaper, this really scary guy at the beginning, and you saw how the NPC reacted to him, to becoming this sort of smarmy travel agent. And then the final blow that makes you realize this is a comedic game is that he has these huge lifts that he's walking on in his shoes. So he looks really tall and scary. So I like that example because it kind of plays with the notion in the player's mind of big scary game versus funny, witty LucasArts game. And that's exactly the message that the game designers wanted to send in that opening sequence for that game. And you as a player know, okay, I've got to survive on my wits here, right? You know, I'm not really big and scary. I'm actually kind of harmless, and the boss is making me stay late, and oh boy, I've got a lot of work to do. So it cues you really well. Okay, so another thing about game design characters, and there was a lot of talk for a while in the interface applications area of characters that adapted to you, but unfortunately the ways they adapted to you were often really annoying ways that you didn't want them to adapt to you. That sort of archetypal looks like you're writing a letter kind of a thing. But game characters are actually crafted to adapt to your moment-by-moment behavior in meaningful, consequential ways that have to do with your gameplay, that are emotionally gratifying. And increasingly, the latest trend in games is that characters actually evolve, and your character can evolve. So I showed you Nintendogs before, and that character, you actually raise that puppy up to be a grown dog. And depending on how nice you are to it and how much you train it and so forth, the character of the dog is influenced. Sort of a strange responsibility to have a virtual pet. This is a trailer. How many people have played Fable? Okay, all right. So Fable 2 is kind of the latest installment of these role-playing style games that are supposed to let you choose between good and evil, and then your character will reflect that, and everything about the world around you will reflect that. So in this game, supposedly, you can also have a child with a character in your home village, and depending on how you treat that child, the child grows up and reacts to you in certain ways. So I'll just show you the trailer from this one. They're really playing up this adaptability thing.
Welcome, child. Your story is waiting. The world that was.
Oh, it's way too dark.
Has changed.
Yeah, you guys aren't going to be able to appreciate that. I'm sorry. Anyway, he just talks about how you could become good, you could become evil, depending on your choices in the game. So also, characters in games tell you, they don't just tell you who you are, they tell you what you can do in the game. So that ranges from outright training in tutorial levels, like a game will flat out say, here's who you are and here's specifically what you can do, so you know what you can do in this interface, but also more subtle affordances of player characters. So did anybody ever play Parappa? I love this game, it's a classic. Okay, so some people thought this game was actually a stealth method for training people how to use the original PlayStation, because all you did was mash buttons in time to music, and people were like, that's stupid, that's not a game. Well, it launched a whole genre of rhythm games because it was just so incredibly fun. And this is a tutorial level where you have this onion character who's training you what you have to do, and he's doing it with a song.
Kick, punch, it's all in the mind. If you wanna test me, I'm sure you'll find the things I'll teach ya. Be sure to beat ya. Nevertheless, you'll get a lesson from teacher. Now kick,
Kick,
punch,
punch,
jump,
chop,
block.
block,
Once more now, kick,
kick,
punch,
punch,
jump,
chop,
and block.
block,
Don't get cocky, it's gonna get rocky. We're gonna move down to the next jockey. Now duck,
duck,
jump,
jump,
turn,
turn,
pause. Listen carefully, jump.
jump.
Okay, so you get the idea. And it's really fun to take this tutorial level. You don't mind. You're probably not going to skip it because it's actually fun and you're learning. It's not this icky thing you have to do. It's not some stupid wizard that walks you through something you didn't want to learn how to do anyway, right? But also, on a more sort of primitive level, in terms of you as the player, game characters give you visual affordances for what you could possibly do in the game world. And these are two sort of extreme examples, right? If you're a giant guy with a gun that has a chainsaw attached to it, you're probably not going to go through the world discussing things with people. You probably can run around and shoot people. That's probably what's going to happen. Whereas if you're a big, bouncy, round thing with a smiley face, you probably don't shoot things. And you might talk, but you probably just make cute little noises. So game avatars just pull out all the stops to tell you really fast, just at a glance, what's possible to do. And that may seem really obvious, but that was not the case with a lot of interface agents. They didn't give you any cues right off the bat about what could happen between the two of you. They didn't help shape your expectations for how much they can understand or what you would be able to do with them. So I think it's a really interesting point. And the last thing that I think is done well with game characters is more a sort of global point about game designers, and that is that I think they have very good boundaries in their design choices, and they have to because it's so risky to develop games. It's a very brutal industry. They focus on the biggest impact moments for players. They are not afraid to use broad strokes like the ones that I've shown you in this talk. And they also make it a point to wink and nod at players who test the boundaries of what they've done. So they set boundaries, and then they think about how people try to push those boundaries and play around with what players are doing there. Okay, so how many game developers are there in the audience here? One. Oh, that's kind of cool. But most of you aren't game developers. Why do you care about this? You know, what does this have to do with you? You know, you're not going to design this stuff. Well, for one thing, characters are becoming a bigger and bigger thing in the world of interfaces. This is from Second Life. How many people have played with Second Life? Second Life is not actually a game per se. It's a 3D environment with a very authorable, with a set of tools that are very easy for people to use to create environments for themselves, and they can create islands for themselves to hang out on. I mean, Wells Fargo has an island in Second Life, okay? And people are starting to think in the world of commerce and interface that you might just interact this way with the bank, you know? So you might actually find yourself in your career having to get up to speed on designing characters in ways you wouldn't have thought possible. And a lot of the gamer techniques are light years ahead of what's happening in the general interface community. So it's a place you can look to quickly get up to speed. Another example of where characters are showing up, how many people have ever used one of these fitting models? This one is from Land's End. Nobody. Okay, so one person. So at Land's End, you can look at the clothes online. One of the biggest criticisms of clothing shopping online is you can't tell how it's going to look on you. You can enter your dimensions, and then it'll make a model that looks like your shape. And then you can sort of adjust the hair and the eye color and all that. And then you can literally, like paper dolls, paste the clothes on the model, and it gives you a rough feel for how that stuff might look on you. This has nothing to do with video games. It's shopping, but yet there you are. Suddenly you have to make all these choices. How realistic is the character? You know, does it move at all? Should it say anything to you? And again, you can look to game design to start to think about how to make those sorts of choices. And then things like voice user interfaces or, you know, interactive voice stuff. I once worked on a voice user interface for a car, and we've all had to deal with voice user interfaces with customer service lines, some of which are really annoying. They're very polite but incredibly annoying. But you might end up in that space. And there's a lot of really interesting voice work that's been done in games that you might want to borrow, because the truth is if someone's frustrated and irritated about something, you want to learn from the emotional design game developers are doing with their characters to craft something that's going to be a better buffer for that person in the voice user interface. But even if you aren't designing characters at all, something like the iPhone, I mean, talk about first impressions, masterful management of first impression. Consumer applications in general, you have to care a lot more about emotion, and you have to care a lot more about social contexts of use of things like small handheld devices, right? And the same thing is true in the living room. All of these new home applications, you know, how something behaves, how socially appropriate its activities are, suddenly becomes really important when your interface is dealing with someone who hasn't had their morning coffee, right? And is trying to figure out how to turn the heat down because the house is really hot and it's really annoying. So game designers have already had to think through working with people's emotions and channeling their emotions, and you can learn a lot of interesting things from the way they design. Okay, so some key takeaways for HCI practitioners. First of all, I can't say this enough. This is what killed, in my opinion, this is what killed most of the interface agent projects I worked on over the last 10 years in traditional productivity space, which is nobody put enough time, money, appropriate skill sets, and attention into those first impressions, into how cool the character was, into does it look like what it can really do. You know, people would call it production values, and they wouldn't want to spend the money. They'd have some guy, you know, do the animation that they knew, right? Especially in research contexts. The thing was so awful when you first encountered it. I remember I saw an agent from a European research group that was barefoot and in overalls with no shirt on and was supposed to be teaching you about science. And I was kind of like, is this a joke? Like, what? I mean, I was asking the people who did it, like, what was you, oh, we just thought it was cute. You know, so this is really important. And it's important because emotion, because because we're emotionally bonding to these things and making judgments about these things very, very quickly. Also, you know, you don't want to have a first impression that you create that you don't back up. You really have to match and extend that first impression with what you do. And really to deliver that, you have to think about the moment-to-moment experience, and that as I'm engaging with this thing, not just when I first look at it or when I finish doing some task, that's rewarding, but that moment-to-moment, it's really engaging to me and what's going on is relevant to my goals. So some places that I see that you could apply some of these specific social skills. Social roles are a very, very helpful rubric to use in thinking about devices. Thinking about what's the personality or the persona of this device. You know, how do I feel about it? You know, if it's a mobile phone, people have very strong attachments to their mobile phone, and it's cool in a certain way, and it's kind of like my little friend. I mean, that sounds laughable, but it's really true. And if you grasp that and if you set that up in your design thinking, you're going to come up with a much more interesting product. It also helps to shape the expectations the person has of that product. And it helps you as a designer move from just thinking about all the features I want in this product to also thinking about what kind of engagement, what kind of experience I want the person to have. Audience appropriateness, thinking in different ways about audience, what kind of audience you're trying to reach, not trying to target everybody and their brother necessarily right away, but thinking about how game designers go for a niche, maybe transfer a niche from one place to another, and can build a big audience for a game out of those tactics. And that might be something if you're thinking of starting your own software company or developing a small niche application, that you can start to think in creative ways about that. Something like, you know, Facebook that starts out as a college application and suddenly blossoms, right? So you see that happening more and more. And I think thinking that way from the beginning is a smart thing to do. The reason I have does anybody recognize what that is? That's a purikura. It's a Japanese, these booths where you could take photos of yourself and you get these little stickers of you and your friends. Well, I was listening to someone talk about mobile phone cameras and how the people who did the first mobile phone cameras thought that the people who would buy them first would be techies who wanted to have the latest gadget, but the cameras were such bad resolution that the techies kind of turned their noses up at it. The people who bought those camera phones were these girls who already had been, you know, getting these really grainy images on these little stickers, and they're like, oh, cool, it's like purikura, but it's in my phone, and I can trade and share these. So that was a surprising audience that actually really, that things really took off from. So being creative about what audience you can borrow that understands some aspect of what you're doing and taking it into a new space. Providing people with more affordances for who they are and what they can do. I think that's a really big one. And increasingly, since you might be doing an application where it's okay to have an avatar, thinking really consciously about how do I want the person's avatar in this world to be that will help shape for them what they think they can do and who they are, and really leveraging some of those tactics from the game world. Because I think a lot of designing good interactions is about managing expectations. So I also think, I mean, in a way, it's unfair to talk about this stuff without addressing a little bit that you have to work in different ways to build things this way. First of all, if you're going to focus on moment-to-moment engagement, that requires a really prototype-driven process for making things. It's really hard to tell if something's engaging unless you make a small version of it and test it. You can't just spec it all up front. And game designers throw away a lot of prototypes. They expect to do a lot of prototyping. Game development houses throw away the first stage of many, many games. They actually fund a prototype and then say, oh no, that was really stupid. And it's not because the developers were stupid. No one could tell it was stupid until they built the thing that looked stupid. It sounded great on paper. So the point is that you may end up having to work more this way to the extent that you're trying to engage people with moment-to-moment interaction. You won't be able to know ahead of time if an idea is good or not. Also, you may have to shift what your metrics are for success. instead of thinking how many features or how efficient this thing is, you have to start asking yourself and asking all those people around you who measure things, how do I know if somebody's really engaged with this? How do I know how they're feeling? You need to have more fine-grained information about how they're feeling. And there's a whole sub-area of the Kai community devoted to this now, trying to figure out how the heck do we know how people are feeling? Do we hook sensors to them? Do we ask them to talk about it while they're doing? There aren't necessarily any magic solutions, but the point is if you want to get a good experience going, you're going to have to think of this side of things too. And game developers are scrambling on this and trying really hard to figure, besides the sort of brutal evolutionary pressures of the game failed or succeeded, they're trying to find more fine-grained ways to figure this out. Another trick that game developers have up their sleeve is the developer knows a lot more about what the player's doing and what the world is doing than most traditional application designers. So you might think, okay, well that's hopeless, how am I ever going to change that? But the fact is, with mobile devices and home interfaces and so forth, you may be able to set up a situation where you design in more knowledge of context, okay? Where you know what the person's trying to do, and you study what they're trying to do, and that will give you a lot more control. So the way that I like to put it is, maybe it's okay for you to lead the user in the dance instead of them driving everything and having to control everything themselves. If you have a really good picture of what you think they're going to try to accomplish, besides writing a letter, but like real things they're trying to accomplish, you can actually lead them in a really nice way, and that can help to manage their emotional experience of your interface, and they won't mind that if it's a good experience. They may even really enjoy being led. So, a couple of conclusions. I can't say this enough, and this is something that, like, I give talks at the Game Developers Conference, I'm going to be doing that next week, is to try to educate those in that community who think it's all about just high-end graphics and technology, that actually social skills are not the icing on the cake. They're really at the heart of, if you look at the best characters in games over time, all the way from text games to the latest ones, it's about engaging players' emotions and really crafting this powerful experience that could come out of a very, very, very simple game, very, very, very simple character. And I do believe that you can apply a lot of this, whether you're actually creating real characters or whether you're trying to move into these more leisure and entertainment-oriented spaces as a designer, by starting to think about, well, what are the necessary social skills for my interface? Who is it speaking to? How should it behave? What kind of emotional contract should it have? I think those things will serve you well. And that's it. Yes?
This is a long comment, and so it's not a question, but
okay.
I would very much like your response. So I was thinking about the difference between the avatar in a game and the avatar in the paper.
Yes.
And I disagree with you somewhat. Because
okay.
I think that the paperclip is actually very well done, and when I looked at your list of avatar requirements and modeling, it passes.
Okay.
I think the difference is the environment. So think about it this way. In the game, the situation is well determined by the game designer.
Yes.
And in some sense, I, as a player, am trying to read the mind of the avatars and other, things that I encounter. So I'm trying to understand what they're about.
Yeah.
They're trying to communicate to me. I interact with them. They interact in their appropriate way.
Yes.
And then I try to learn from this and learn how I should react.
Yes.
In Microsoft Word,
yes.
I have a task I'm trying to accomplish. And now this cute little avatar comes up and is trying to read my mind.
Yes.
It has to adapt to me. It has to figure out what my real high-level goals are and offer me advice. And reading people's minds, people aren't even any good at it, let alone the machine.
That's exactly right. Yes.
So I think the real difference here is not how well the avatar itself is done, but rather the reciprocal settings, and it's the emphasis is reversed in the.
I agree with the core of your point, but I guess I would say that I think the paperclip had bad social skills because it was underpowered because of that problem. Because, well, two things. One is, in the genre of office applications, I expect to control everything. So I agree, the paperclip was starting from way behind for most users. And I did hear from some people who were very novice users, they actually liked the paperclip because they didn't have this genre expectation from Microsoft Word that I control everything and I'm not going to cede any of my time to what's going on. But I do think that there is something useful to learn from the fact that game designers do control the context, right?
I don't deny that.
Yeah.
I too have encountered users who really enjoy the paperclip or the dog or the
Right, or the
toys,
Einstein.
and
Yep.
it actually tested very well, which is one of these
Mhm.
got released.
Oh, I
Bob
know.
was released. In fact,
Yep.
Cliff was involved.
Oh, I know, in Bob.
But
in the part.
I think that, let me hear an hypothesis. The social skills of the paperclip is identical to the social skills that you showed. The difference is that in one case, I find them inappropriate and unyielding. In
Okay.
the other case,
Yeah.
setting is everything.
But but are they still good social skills if you find them inappropriate? I mean,
No, as a result,
right.
they become social.
So I think we're saying the same thing. I'm seeing social skills as partly when and where you use them, and so that even in Bob, right, which was the forerunner, the avatar controlled much more of the environment and was your window through into the environment. So it was much more okay and appropriate, and that part of what happened to the poor paperclip is it got ported from that kind of a world where it was more in control of things into this terrain where it really didn't know what you were trying to do. It was just doing its best. So, I don't think it was a rude paperclip. I think it was an ill-informed paperclip that, yeah.
So a follow-up to that, what would you do to the paperclip to make it have the social skills that you want it to have?
Well, I think that the idea that you could, so when I started working on interface agents, the holy grail was this kind of, what was the name of the guy? The Apple guy, Phil. Phil was going to be your assistant. He was going to do everything for you. What I've learned from games and also from building various projects is trying to establish a one-on-one persistent relationship with a user is one of the hardest terrains for a character. Because AI is nowhere near that, and as you were saying, even human beings can't really, you could be assigned somebody who's your assistant that you just hate for no reason, right? So it's just an impossible task. So I wouldn't necessarily, I think the initial product, Bob, was better because it had smaller applications that the character knew all about. I guess I would say this may not be an appropriate venue for an agent, and if you did introduce an agent, you would want to think about demographics of people who are open to engaging with the character, and then making the process itself really fun. Thinking about how that could be fun. Another suggestion I might have in this day and age is thinking about how, is there any way for users to generate some content for a character like that? If it's about help, if it's about assistance, is there any way for the user population who knows what the going issues are to be authoring, kind of create a living body of knowledge that a character could deliver to you, so that the burden isn't on the developers to somehow think of all the possible things that could go wrong for you. I think it was a very difficult space for a character to take on. So I don't know if that answers your question. But I think moving into the future, there are more situations where you're not necessarily having a desktop metaphor. You have an interface where people may accept having a shared space. You may know more about what's going on for the user. And you can start to think in different ways about how to integrate characters. So that's maybe more the message I'm trying to get across to the students in the room. Yes?
What about possible convergence between avatars and robots?
Yeah, I mean, robots are an interesting space. I mean, it's hard to know what people are thinking, and it's really hard to move like a person and be physically graceful like a person. And you have to actually engineer the expressions and the behavior, which introduces a whole other set of problems. I mean, I think Sony's discontinued their Aibo line, right? Lately, I've seen most of the work seems to still be in Japan, of trying to personify robots and really create some kind of a relationship. I don't know. I think to me, it's sort of like the map and the territory. Like, it's so expensive to create the map, it might as well be the territory, but maybe I'm totally wrong about that. Yeah.
I still have a bit of a question concerning your research methodology.
Yes.
It looks a little bit like you take all the things which are realized in successful games as good design choice. So what is how do you evaluate that? How do you come up? I mean, this is a complex question.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is.
Since it's a multi-dimensional design space, and you could think maybe even of better solutions in somehow.
Well, I think for me, what I saw a lot in some people call it embodied conversational agents or interface agents or whatever. In that community, people were typically doing what's very common in social science and engineering, which is breaking a chunk of the problem off and saying, I'm going to focus only on gesture. I'm going to focus only on, faces. I'm going to focus only on, the artificial intelligence part of trying to track what the user is doing. And what you often ended up with were these piecemeal solutions that when you put them together didn't really work very well. So what I tried to do with this work was essentially a case study / design pattern approach, where I looked at games that had awards for their characters or had word of mouth value for their characters, or characters that were memorable years later in people's minds, and to examine those in a holistic manner and look at what was happening with the design. And the book is also a product of, there are a lot of interviews with actual designers, and I've done presentations for several years at the Game Developers Conference, after which practitioners will come to me, sometimes people who've created those very same characters, and have dialogue about what they're doing and why. And you start to see it too in the last year or so in the game developer community. They're becoming more articulate about why they're making the choices they are, and some of that is corroborating these results. So it's very much a case study approach. It's not the only way to tackle this problem. But to my mind, it was an interesting counterpoint to a lot of the work that I'd seen done and had done as a researcher to try to tackle creating engaging agents. Yeah.
So Catherine, I want to follow up on Volker's question.
Yeah.
You showed briefly and didn't discuss your feelies. I don't know what you call them, but they remind me of J.J. Gibson's feelies, the white, different shaped things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you've done some pretty interesting work in different ways of eliciting how people feel about games. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, yeah, so maybe I should go back to that slide. Yeah, I got frustrated with thinking about evaluation. How do you find out how someone's feeling? And so one thing that everybody's jumping on the bandwagon lately is, oh, let's use these sensors. We'll read people's brain waves, and we'll read their pulse, and we'll know how they're feeling. But the truth is, even the people who make those measures don't really know what the results mean necessarily. They don't know how to calibrate them. It's really, really hard. And so I was working with a colleague in Sweden, and we were thinking, well, self-report is really not such a bad thing, but maybe there's something about putting emotions into words that's really too, perturbs how you're feeling too much. What if you didn't have to put emotions into words? So we worked with an artist, and we actually came up with a set of sculptured objects to let people, I know it's going to sound really bizarre to you, but to let people choose objects that indicate how they feel. And you could choose more than one. You could gesture with them. You could hold them in their hand, or you could arrange them. We got really interesting results from people, one of which led us into all this research on synesthesia and the fact that sharp objects were always negative and rounded objects were always positive, and things with protrusions tended to indicate emotions that had more kind of arousal. It was really bizarre. So I've been playing around with just novel ways to get at emotion. Yeah, and there's a Kai paper on that work from last year. Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, Kia and I worked on this project, and we co-edited an issue of the International Journal of Human Computer Studies that has a bunch of different people's work, so, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you talk more about what you've been doing in your lab?
Yeah, okay, so one thing I've been doing in my lab is looking a lot at social play, at how people play party games, and trying to isolate qualities of design choices that create certain moods in people that get them to be social and extroverted and have fun with how they're playing. So I'm working on a paper on that. The other thing I've been doing most recently is a project called Wriggle, in which I'm trying to take some of what I'm seeing in terms of gesture and emotion and craft a game in which we're hacking the Nintendo Wii controllers to give people a communal experience of how you create emotional atmosphere through what you do and how you play, and make people a little bit more aware of how emotion travels between people, how it isn't just something in your head, but it's something that exists in a room, for example. Get people to think more creatively about that. So, yeah, that's a couple of projects I've been working on. Sarah actually captured a lot of the video for the book and is in the book, so it's nice to see you here. Yes?
You're talking character design a lot about consistency, setting up consistent expectations and consistent behaviors. And I understand for user devices that would be good. I don't want to have to guess how my phone's feeling today.
Yeah.
But for game designers, might that be like a next frontier? Part of the interesting thing of being human and having real interactions is you're having a bad day and I have to respond to that. So not having you behave consistently every day is part of the richness of
Yes.
being.
No, actually that, and I guess it didn't come across so well in the talk, but I think one of the most masterful things that game designers do is they spend a lot of time on error conditions and out of control users. Like, part of the contract that a player has with a game developer is, I'm going to try to break your game in really interesting ways. So I actually think the game design community would seize upon that challenge and turn that into a form of play earlier than most people and find that tremendously fun. I think that's right on. You know, they're in that industry not because it's the best paid industry, but because of the chaos and the fun of using the latest technology to play with expectations. My daughter's having a bad day. Maybe that's, you know, a cue that we've had enough Q&A. If anybody wants to come up and talk to me, you're welcome to. And thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you for coming. Of course, I recognize you. Yes.
For information on other online Stanford seminars and courses, please visit study.stanford.edu.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.